All right, guys, so here's the answer key to the practice test for Unit 3. So I'm going to run through these. I'm just going to kind of talk to you about them, and I'll, jot a few notes down, but hopefully this makes sense, and you can bring any questions that you have to class next time. So, first question is actually probably one of the hardest ones. Female high endurance athletes. So that means like extreme, like distance sports, right? Like marathon runners, skiers, cross-country skiers, cyclists, people that do like prolonged exercise, triathlons, stuff like that. They often have severe problems having a regular menstrual cycle and or getting pregnant. So why would this happen? So this is really tricky. You have to think about what fuel are high endurance athletes going to be burning. Remember, we sort of have this checklist of what fuels we use when. Our primary fuel as animals is going to be glycogen, right? Which is stored sugar. If you're an endurance athlete, though, and you're running a marathon and you're like 3-4 hours into this thing, you've burned through all your glycogen, right? So you need to move on to something a little bit more sustainable, and that's usually going to be fat. This is why endurance athletes have an incredibly low percentage of body fat, right? So they end up having a very low percentage of body fat because it is a main fuel for them, okay? So then you got to think about, okay, well, what is going to be the downside of having a really low percentage of body fat? What do we use fat for, right? So we use fat for storage, right? Storage of energy. But we also use fat to build our cell parts and, more importantly, to make our steroid hormones, okay? And so if we have almost no fat, that means we're going to have, right, little to no steroid hormones or low levels of these. And these are like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, things like that. Well, what controls the menstrual cycle and or pregnancy? Steroid hormones, right? So it's actually a very common condition if you're a high level athlete as a female, is that you end up having irregular menstrual cycles, right? And sometimes you can take synthetic hormones like a birth control kind of pill, which isn't, I mean, it's called birth control, but it's not really just birth control. It's hormone regulation, I would call them pills, to try and get yourself back on track. Or if you are an extreme athlete, you may actually have to back off of your training and get your body fat percentage up high enough for your body to be able to get pregnant, right? So your body is very protective of you, and it will not allow you to attempt to carry a child if you don't have the proper fuel to do so. And so that's part of it's your body's response. It's like a protective mechanism saying you're not ready, you're not prepared for this. And so sometimes you actually have to back off training a little bit in order to do that if that's what you're trying to do. So interesting to have these side effects, but it really all comes down to your percentage of body fat and what we use it for. That was a really hard question. Okay. Second one. Why is fat the most ideal way to store energy? Try to list 2 reasons. So, the most obvious, I would say, is that it contains more energy per gram, right? And so per molecule of fat, you can actually, it's like more bang for your buck, so to speak, right? You can actually pack in more energy for per molecule of fat. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is there's no water required, right? Fats and water don't mix. And so the reason why we use fats as storage primarily is because they repel water. And water takes up a lot of space in your body. And so with no water required, we can pack them in. So they can take up less space. So we can not only does each molecule have more energy potential in it, but we can also pack more of them into a small space, and therefore because they don't like water for that. So I would say those are the 2 primary reasons. The other is we have a little bit more flexibility if you want to kind of go this route with the unsaturated, saturated. Oops. situation, right? We can have some of them unsaturated, some of them saturated. We don't necessarily have that freedom with glycogen as easily. So that gives you just a little bit more freedom in terms of how you store your energy. That could be an option as well. I'm sure there are more, but I would say those are the primary ones. Okay, number 3. What element must be removed from proteins in order for them to be used as energy? That is nitrogen, right? And it's because of the amino groups on the amino acids. If you think about it, we do not talk about nitrogen at all when we're talking about carbohydrate or fat metabolism. It's because your body doesn't know what to do with it. And so literally like step 1 of protein metabolism is to cut the nitrogen group off, to cut the amino group off, because we don't know how to process that for energy. And so we cut it off, right? And it gets sent out as waste in the form of urea or your urine, which is basically glorified ammonia, which is why your urine smells kind of like ammonia, right? So that's how we do that. So if you are on a really high protein diet, you need to make sure you're staying hydrated, because otherwise your urine is going to become very concentrated and very like aromatic, right? It's going to have a very strong, pungent smell to it. And that could be a result of a very high protein diet without combating that. Okay, acetyl-CoA is central in energy metabolism. Explain this. All roads go through it, okay? In other words, carbs, lipids, and proteins all bypass this somehow. Or I guess not, maybe bypass isn't the right word. All carbs, lipids, and proteins all go through it, right? In other words, all aerobic metabolism starts here. Right? So we often say it's central in energy metabolism because all of the fuels somehow get into the acetyl-CoA in order to do the aerobic process. All right, in many third world countries, starvation is a major health problem. Explain why someone under those circumstances would have very little muscle mass. So, when you are in starvation mode, okay, your body then is starting to go into storage to get fuel. Now, you have options, right? Glucose/glycogen is number 1. But if we're out of that because we haven't eaten in a while, then we don't have that. And again, if you haven't eaten in a while, you're probably pretty low on your fat storage as well. So where do we go? And that's proteins. So in extreme situations, we use protein as the secondary fuel after carbs. Okay? So when I say extreme situations, I could be saying, like, exercise is another good example. If you're running wind sprints, right, you're going to use whatever sugar reserves you have right away, but then you're going to go protein. You're not going to do a lot of fat burning in, like, extreme exercise. When do you do fat burn? Well, when you're doing sort of low-level exercise or just sort of going about your day, right? If you ever run on a treadmill, they have, like, settings where you can say, like, fat burn or, you know, intervals or things like that. The fat burn workout is almost always sort of like a low-level but consistent workout. Like, you're just going for a long jog. You're going for a long bike ride, a long row, a long whatever, right? But you're not necessarily at max effort. That means you're going to use a lot of fat. If you're in extreme situations, and starvation is one of those because your body's going to respond the same way, stress, it's going to go to proteins next. And so that's why muscle mass is very, very, very low in those people that are under these conditions. Okay, blood glucose, regulated by 2 hormones, insulin and glucagon. walked through the step-by-step process the body would undergo if the blood sugar of an individual was 40 milligrams per deciliter, which is well below the normal level of about 70 to 110. Okay? So, blood sugar is 40. A couple reasons why that could happen. You could have a condition, right? You could actually have a low blood sugar condition, which is pretty common. Or you could have just maybe not eaten in a very long time, right? Maybe it's like first thing in the morning, and you didn't eat a very good dinner and so on. Whatever the reason, your blood sugar is really low. So that's the signal, right? The concentration of the glucose is the signal. So your body needs to now send the message that my blood sugar is low. How do you send messages? Hormones, okay? This guy, glucagon, sends the message, okay? So your body is going to secrete glucagon to send the message that sugar is low, okay? So you're going to release glucagon to send the message that sugar is low. So now we got to fix it, okay? What are we going to do? So now we're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to go into storage and break down for glucose, right? So we're going to go into our glycogen, chop it up. We might go into our fats, convert it to acetyl-CoA, chop it up. Might even go into proteins if we need to. Get it to acetyl-CoA, chop it all up. But that's the primary thing, is we're going to go into our storage and break it down. The second thing that we're probably going to be doing also is making our own glucose. Okay, and that's in the process called gluconeogenesis. And it's basically like the fermentation pathway, the lactic acid pathway. We're going to be trying to make our own from the pyruvate that we have. Okay? Remember, glucagon works in conjunction with our stress hormones. Okay? And so it's also going to stimulate your fight or flight response. Okay? It's going to stimulate your fight or flight response. So like epinephrine, adrenaline, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's that one. Only about half our vitamins we ingest through food are stored for long-term use in our bodies. The other half, if not immediately used, are just sent out as waste. This is because some are fat soluble versus water soluble, right? So water soluble, you can't store. Fat soluble, you can store, right? So you don't necessarily have to eat the fat soluble ones every day, but you do need to ingest the water soluble ones every day. Okay, primary and secondary fuels used by the body under normal conditions. Primary, glucose/glycogen. Secondary, fat, triglycerides. Under stress conditions, still glucose/glycogen. If I could spell, that'd be good. Second choice is actually protein, okay? And it's due to the speed, right? We can actually process some of the proteins a little bit faster in fewer steps than we need to with the lipids. And so that's why your body goes to proteins when you're stressed. It's just a speed thing. Epinephrine inhibits insulin. Okay, explain this. So, insulin is present when blood sugar is too high. So in other words, every time you eat, right after you eat, your insulin levels spike because your body is sending the message, my blood sugar's high, what am I going to do with it? After that, right, if insulin is present, then you're going to either use that sugar or put it into storage to get your levels back to normal. Okay? So why does epinephrine inhibit this? Well, epinephrine is a response to stress in your body. And when you're stressed out, you need to have blood sugar ready, right? You need to have sugar in your blood at the ready. And so you don't want to be putting sugar away for storage. You actually want to be doing the opposite. You want to be keeping sugar in your blood so it's ready to go in an emergency, okay? So epinephrine is your stress response, so you need blood sugar, right? So it's actually going to stimulate, it's going to inhibit insulin, but it's going to stimulate the opposite hormone, the glucagon, because you're trying to prepare for an emergency, okay? Okay, below is a graph of pH in muscles of an athlete before, during, after a workout. Okay, heavy exercise in blue, moderate in green, mild in red. And it's looking at the pH of the muscle cells. Remember, pH, lower pH means more acidic. So explain the discrepancies in the line, remembering that lower pH is higher acidity. So, the more extreme exercise, the more anaerobic metabolism happens. So you end up with a buildup of lactic acid and CO2, which is an acidic gas. And that's why the pH goes down the more extreme your exercise. Right? It's not too bad when you're just kind of going for a jog, but it gets worse and worse there. During its intense exercise, this athlete often found that they would slow down and that it was harder to perform the necessary tasks. Using your understanding of aerobic and anaerobic, explain how they were able to continue exercising despite, quote unquote, hitting the wall. So hitting the wall is usually described as the point at which we switch to mostly anaerobic. Oops. Okay. So in other words, up here, you're doing both, right? So we're kind of cruising along here, right? Using both aerobic and anaerobic, right? You're still breathing hard. Then you start to pick up your respirations a little bit, right? And the harder you exercise, right, the point at which your body like hits that wall. Like you can't breathe fast enough to keep up with what you're doing. So you start doing more and more of the anaerobic, which is why you have down here the lower pH. In all of these, though, you're going to see the body kind of picks it up and recovers a little bit, okay, after the exercise ends, right? Your body kind of catches back up again. But while you're doing the exercise, okay, while you're exercising, extreme exercise is down here, and that's the issue, okay? And so you're going to see the time at which these people hit their wall is very different, right? The blue line down here, this person hit their wall faster, okay? And so on and so on. And it's because they're working out harder. And so they're going to hit that switch to anaerobic a lot faster and more drastically. And that's really the gist here. So when you quote unquote feel like you're hitting the wall, that's usually your body kind of switching its fuel source, right? It doesn't go 100% one way or the other. Like you're still doing both, but you're going to do more of the anaerobic after you hit the wall because your body can't quite keep up. Okay? And that is the answer to the test questions. Okay? Bring any questions you have